One thing I do want to talk about a little bit and kind of think on, though, is iPad computer convergence. So you may have noticed that Apple in the past has run a few ads, and they've been running a few more ads recently that seem to imply that the iPad, for many people, is their next computer, basically their next desktop. And it seems like the coming years, or in the coming years, we're going to get more and more blurring of the lines between an iPad and a consumer Mac desktop. Things are getting even more fuzzy. As a matter of fact, display analyst Ross Young thinks that, based on rumors from the ELEC and LG, that Apple is planning to update the 12.9 inch and 11.9 or 11-inch iPad Pros with OLED displays. So moving in that direction. And then there's a rumor recently from Twitter that claims that Apple is working on an iPad OS feature called Mixer. And what this would be is it's designed to take full screen apps that are running on the iPad. So I've got my iPad, I've launched my app, typical iPad experience, right? I've got the full screen app running. And now I drop my Mac, or my iPad rather, on my Magic Keyboard. I connect a keyboard, I connect a trackpad. It would recognize that and then immediately take my full screen apps and shrink them into windowed versions, more like I would have on my Mac desktop. And the rumor claims this feature would be exclusive to iPads with the M1 processor. So we know that Apple's moving iPads to the M1. So we're getting the same processor on a desktop Mac or a notebook Mac as we are in an iPad. And now we're talking about a more traditional windowing system when I've got a mouse and keyboard connected. Yeah, it's moving more toward that sort of integration. And it's interesting to think about how Apple's going to do this integration. Is the idea that an iPad becomes more like a Mac, or it just works more seamlessly with the Mac? It's something that would interestingly pair very nicely with universal control that we've been talking about. And I find it very, very interesting. What's a bit funny to me about this personally is that when I work on my laptop, I find that even though I'm using multiple apps and I have multiple apps open, I'm often working only in one window at a time. I'm not a split screen person, or I don't, use a lot of these apps that sort of lay out your multiple apps in little areas on your screen. And I think mainly that's because if I'm just working on my laptop display, it's not a lot of screen real estate. Even with a 16-inch MacBook Pro, I don't feel like I have a lot of space to have multiple windows side by side or laid out on my screen. Maybe that's just me. But funny enough, when I'm working on my 11-inch iPad, I will use the split screen feature quite a bit, especially when like taking notes and doing research for the show. I tend to use it more. So I tend to use more like a windowing system or a multi-app layout on my iPad than I do on my Mac. With my Mac, if I have multiple screens, of course, then I've got all the screen real estate, and I prefer working with multiple apps open and up on the screen, multiple windows, and those sorts of things. But generally, when I'm working on a smaller screen or a laptop, I'm not doing that. I am actually treating it more like an iPad. But maybe that's just me. I don't know if that's just me. I'd be curious to know from you in the community, what are you doing? Do you use on smaller screens? Are you using a windowed system where you're tiling your apps around and you're sort of multitasking? It's never really worked out for me. But again, I could be I could be a little bit odd. So I'd be curious to know how you're doing things, and if you think this convergence of kind of making the iPad experience more like a desktop experience, does that make sense? And are we getting to this point of convergence where at some point the operating systems are going to converge? It does kind of feel that way, at least for iPad and Mac OS, right? Apple split off iPad OS from core iOS a few years back, and the two seem to be getting closer and closer, and I think we're seeing more and more signs of that.